Is there an outside there?
Going live.
Okay.
Welcome to the last talk track. Today we talk with Juan Venegas, from Growth Tribe, and we're going to end today with storytelling and exactly talking about how to translate data into powerful stories. Enjoy the talk, and Juan.
Hello, thank you very much, Alex. Welcome everyone to this talk about translating data into powerful stories. I'm going to talk about data storytelling and visualization. I used to teach at Edinburgh University, which means I'm used to dealing with 18-year-old hangover kids. You're not going to do worse than them unless you drank already, which, sign at the conference, a little bit, a little beer, it's fine. I'm going to start today with a stat that never fails to break my heart, which is the fact that 87% of data projects are not put into production. And why is this? Why is this happening? Well, let me show you the reasons. And, well, you know what? Actually, no, I'm not going to show you the reasons. Because if there's something that I would like you to take away from this talk is that you should reveal things one at a time, right? So very slowly, like as data professionals, we tend to saturate the audience very, very quickly. We just throw a lot of data. We throw a spreadsheet straight away, which is a lot of information all at once. So I'm going to show you the reasons why the projects are not deployed, but I'm going to show you one by one. So first of all is dirty data. Okay, that's a technical reason. Lack of data science talent, again, another one. But then we have things like lack of management or financial support. And that starts being related to how we communicate with the business side. Then there's also lack of clear questions to answer, also related to this. Data unavailable, that's a technical one. And then we have results not used by decision makers. And finally, explaining data science to others. So explicitly in the last one, and still one of the most important, we struggle to communicate. Right? But 4 out of these 7 reasons are related to communicating with the business side, to making ourselves more understandable. So today, I'm going to talk about the following. I'm going to talk about data visualization. And within that, I'm going to talk about the principle of separation and also cleaning and highlighting. I'll discuss in a moment what the principle of separation is. And then we're going to talk about storytelling. In particular, I'm going to talk about conflict. And also, I'm going to talk about one very important concept that is going to help you opening up all your stories, which is called the storyline. Now, I'm going to tell you straight away, I'm going to focus much more on storytelling for 2 reasons. I think that there is a lot of good visualization content out there. And second, for storytelling is something that we just kind of started, like people struggle to define. And we will see to the extent that this is a problem because some people they don't know what they're doing, even if they call it data storytelling. So we're going to work with those terms as well. So let me start with the first part, which is the visualization part. And in principle, in particular, with the principle of separation. So I'm going to take an example from an application called Todoist, which is similar to Trello or To-Do, Workflowy, any application that you use for task management. So you can imagine from a data point of view, you have a lot of users that come in, they add their task, they complete their task, they get the satisfying tick at the end, and they spend a certain amount of time in the application. So what type of data can we collect from this app in particular, right? What is the list of features that we would use? We would have things like the tenure, like if they integrated the calendar or not with the tasks to put everything together, the biweekly number of tasks, the duration of the sessions, if they read the FAQ or not, and then many others. And there is one variable that is going to become very important, which is if they churned or not. So if you do data science, if you work on analytics or machine learning, you're probably thinking where this is going, right? We can make a prediction. We can do a supervised learning model to predict the churning rate depending on the other factors, okay? Now, I'm not going to focus too much on that yet. We're going to talk about the project later. But let me start with the type of visuals that we will have in this project. So let's imagine that we want to plot the probability of churning with respect to the number of biweekly tasks. And this is the type of graph that you would get in Excel if you just have the two columns and just put it there, right? Excel or any other similar application that you use. And the temptation when we get to this kind of visual is like, okay, I have it, but it's not very pretty. So I'm just gonna clean it a bit. I'm just gonna go in the background, clean the grid, label it properly, right? The axis so it can be readable. And you get to something like this, okay? Which is not bad. You can even put a title explaining that users that complete more tasks churn less. As you can see in the bottom of the graph, there's an accumulation of points. That means that people in the bottom right, people who complete more tend to churn less. But the problem with this is that, okay, you say, okay, yeah, I'm happy with this. Okay, next one. And this is the problem, right? To get to that point that, okay, yeah, I clean it superficially and then I'm happy with it. And there's a lot of processes that we are not doing. There's a lot of jumps that we take in here. And I would like to avoid that. And I would like to give you the best possible advice I can give you in terms of communication. It goes for visualization and it goes for storytelling. It is like, when you go to a talk and people, you wonder, it's like, is this person telling me everything they know, like their biggest secret? This is mine, but I don't think it's a secret at all. I think a lot of people know it. A lot of creative people know it. I call it the principle of separation. And it's the fact that the key to successful visualization storytelling, to communication in general, is to separate the processes of brainstorming from selecting ideas, writing from rewriting, plotting graphs from polishing, right? These are two different and almost opposite processes. I'll give you an example. When you try to write an email, an important email, and you're like, oh, how do I, let me say this like, no, wait. And it is very difficult to do it and do it well at the same time. It's so much easier to say, okay, let me generate ideas. Let me just say all the stupid things that, I'm not going to send, but I just need to get them out of my head. And then I'll select what's the important content. So this is the way we should work with data, especially when we are exploring, when we are trying to understand what's happening with the data. We look a lot, but we don't settle too early. Because otherwise, if we settle with something that kind of looks nice already, we are very tempted to use it later, right? It's what people call in psychology beauty bias. And I am very sensitive to beauty bias because normally when I do trainings, when I teach classes, we always ask students to give us their feedback. So this is the standard question that we have, give us feedback on our teachers and their teaching style. Be honest, we don't mind. And this person didn't mind either. They said, find more handsome ones. So yeah, we don't want to get too attached to pretty things. So what we do is when we have this graph, it's like, okay, we have this graph. What can I understand from here? I can understand that there is an accumulation towards the right of churning less. It's like, okay, next, this is the moment to say, okay, let's go to the next one. Let's keep understanding. Let's keep generating ideas. How about we plot the churn rates depending on paid subscriptions versus free subscriptions? And we have something like this, which is not pretty, which is also not very useful because it's kind of around 26% in both cases. And it doesn't tell us much. So it's like, okay, I understand it. I understand it different. Okay, next one. And you keep going. And then at some point, maybe you feel inspired and you want to draw a pie chart. No, this is where I draw the line. Many people draw the line here. Pie charts are quite difficult to understand. It takes quite a lot of cognitive load. So try to use bar charts as much as you can. I always say, with pie charts, donut charts, and all that, if you put it in your mouth, don't put it in your graphs. That's good advice in general. So what are we going to do? Let me focus now on the second part of visualization, which is the cleaning and highlighting part. So how are we going to do this? Let's say that after looking at many graphs, after being done with the brainstorming, we have settled for the initial graph, right? So we want to plot, we want to understand how the probability of churning changes with the number of biweekly tasks. I said, okay, so we have this, but it's not very clear. So instead of going for design first, the first thing that we should do is like, can we, data-wise, can we mathematically clean it a bit? And you could think like, oh, maybe we can bin them, right? Instead of one task and every point, we can take from 1 to 5 tasks, and then we take the average. For 5 to 10 tasks, and then we take the average, and so on. And indeed, you would see something much cleaner, right? Something like this. And I don't know about you, but when I look at this type of graph, my eyes kind of already draw in a line somehow. So in this case, it's kind of acceptable also because task is a quantitative variable, right? Of course, you cannot have 1.5 tasks, but you go 1 to 3 all the way. You could say, well, we could use a line chart just to make it, just to guide the audience a bit more, something like this, right? Nice and simple. This, again, is even with the default color of Excel, right? So as you would have it. And this is the moment when you start cleaning, when you're happy that this is understandable. It's like, okay, now let me clean it. Let me highlight the important stuff and so on. So instead of showing you the different steps, because I'm sure you know how to do them in Excel, Tableau. If not, please ask. But I think those are one Google away. I'm going to show you the final result. And I'm going to show you the final result as I would present it. Remember at the beginning that I didn't want to show everything at once. And it's one of the things that data scientists do very often. And while this might look a bit much to you, it is very healthy for an audience who's not very familiar with data. So when you have to present a graph, you go like very slowly and you say like, look, this is the probability to churn versus the number of completed tasks. Before seeing any data, there is a framework for it. Before seeing any data, the audience knows that, okay, I know what I'm going to look at. Now show me. You show them. It looks like this, right? That aspect of just explaining the axis is something we very often don't do. And it's so easy. I mean, it does take a bit of a time if you have an image to cut it and cut the different parts and reveal one at a time in PowerPoint or Google Slides. It does take 5 minutes to do, but it's 5 minutes. And then you can ease in with the audience, right? And ask them, and we have the probability of churning versus the number of biweekly tasks. What do you think we're going to see? And there's a room for more interaction with the audience. Now, there is something that we can highlight. So this, as you can see, is very minimalistic, right? I just tried to strip down everything that wasn't necessary and try to highlight the data line a bit more. But there are other things that we can highlight. We can say, okay, look, around this part, right, around 20 tasks or more, right, this point, it looks like the probability of churning is not uniformly decreasing anymore, right? At the beginning, it does decrease quite clearly, and then it's kind of oscillates around there, right? So it's kind of a minimum. You can say this when you present it, and also it's quite good, and it's quite trending nowadays to add a little text on the graph explaining what's happening, right? So you would say, when a user completes 20 biweekly tasks or more, the probability of leaving is minimal, right? This aspect of revealing one thing at a time, or being with the audience, checking with the audience, is very important, and it's very old as well. This is what happens when you have blackboards, right? When you have blackboards, the professor had to write with the cray with the chalk for a while, and that would give you time to catch up. And I don't know if you had this experience ever at university, that you would enter a classroom and the blackboard would be like full of crazy equations, and you're like, well, there's no way on earth I could ever understand that. And then the professor goes and erases it all, and then one thing at a time starts writing exactly the same blackboard, because it was for the previous group who's teaching, who's learning the same as you are. And then by the end of the session, it's like, oh, actually, I understood that. That's funny. Because you had more time to catch up, to see one thing at a time. So that's one of the things you don't want to saturate. For that, right, when we put all this together, the principle of separation, instead of the formulation I have given you, it translates into different steps, right? So the first one would be to create many ugly graphs, quick and dirty. The quick part is important, but also the dirty one. Then choose the best one. Then you simplify, you take it to the minimum. What's the information that I need? What's the information that the audience needs to understand this and nothing else? Then you highlight the most important parts, and then remember to present things one at a time. So we are with the audience and we create more interaction, especially when it's a live event and you can look people in the eye and you can see how they react. Many of these steps it's not copied, but it's very similar, I must say, to what other people say, right? It's kind of out there, and both me and other experts, we all give like similar advice. If you want to have a proper read on this, there's a wonderful book called Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaum and Affleck, and she covers quite a lot of these things. Now, I love that book. I do recommend it. The only problem I have with it is the title, Storytelling with Data. And it's mostly about data visualization. And not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a wonderful book. There's only a bit of story at the end. But this is when the problem comes. It's like when people talk about data storytelling, I don't think we have defined it properly yet. So just to give you an example of the problems that this results in, let's say that we have the graph that we have shown before. This type of graph, right? When people show it, and where people are talking about this, also about dashboards very often, I don't know if you've heard this before, but it kills me every time. They say, the data tell a story. And I'm like, where is it? Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is nice visualization, it's very clear, and it's also an explanation, right? It's like a scientific explanation or causal explanation of what is happening, right? When we see users complete 20 tasks or more, then they tend to churn less. That's wonderful. And it has a lot of business insight. But I wouldn't call that a story, not in the traditional sense. Why, when we talk about storytelling in data, now the storytelling, no, but we're not going to have any story. It's just the name we give it. Well, I mean, if you're going to call it that, you might as well use all the tools that are available in storytelling. In summary, the problem I have with this is that this kind of story doesn't pass what I call the drunk child test. That is a terrible name for a test. I'm going to rename it. The drunk/child test. Look, I don't have any children. Look, I'm 99% sure that I don't have any children. But if I had, I didn't tell them this kind. I wouldn't come home and say, like, you know what? I'm going to tell you about the churn rate at work. Like, you kids are going to dig it. I don't think it's going to happen, right? So the drunk child test is, if you wouldn't tell it to a drunk or to a kid, I don't think it's a story, right? Stories are about de-escalation and resolution of conflict. And yes, I have said conflict, which is a kind of tricky word when you are in a business environment. But this is where story lives. If you ask any storyteller, if you ask any screenwriter, any theater, any playwright, they all going to tell you, you need to establish the conflict, okay? And that is what we're going to discuss right now. We covered these aspects, and now we're going to talk about the conflict. Now, when I talk about conflict in the settings, very often you will hear people saying, oh, storytelling is good. Storytelling is good. Data storytelling is wonderful because it helps you with the generation of cortisol and oxytocin, right? And you have to say this with a deep voice because it's a profound concept. Look, the jury, by the way, is still out on this one. I'm reading recent research that I don't know if this is the exact reason, but I'm going to go with it, okay? So let's say you want storytelling because it generates cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone related to stress, to alert, right? So basically people are alert, awake. And oxytocin is the hormone related to tenderness, to love, to affection. So you having an audience that is alert and at the same time relating to you, right? Connected to you, having some affection there. Wonderful, right? I would love that. If the audience, I mean, I don't know how, loving and alert you feeling at the moment. I hope very much. But in general, if people ask me, you should have that in your audience, like, yeah, I would love that. But let's look down into what these hormones do. So if you want to generate alert, how about you give me some shock, some conflict? Otherwise, you're not going to generate that alert sense. For oxytocin, well, if you don't give me anybody to care about, if you don't give me any character, then I'm not going to relate to it, right? And normally, by the way, you are the character itself and people connect to you. But if you don't make an effort to connect to them, this is not going to happen. So basically, it looks like many people want the benefits of the story without using the ingredients of a story, which is normally having conflict and having a character, right? And when you have this in a business setting, many people are like, but conflict, how dare you? Conflict at work, that's never going to happen. We need that. We need that to create that engagement. We want to make sure that people are with it. Now, it is true that conflict doesn't mean drama, right? It's not about saying, oh, I couldn't find the data, so I dropped it, and I'm so annoyed that I have a problem with the data, and I have a problem with the stakeholders, and the marketing team is not giving me that. That's whining. That's not a story, right? If you don't fight back, it's not a story. Imagine that, Frodo in Lord of the Rings, like, you have a magic ring you have to destroy. And like, no, I'm going to the bar, man. It's like, there's no story there, right? You got to engage with it. And also, there's something important that you should know. Very often, the conflict doesn't have to be blown out of proportion, right? Sometimes I admit that in some companies it's easier, but other companies are very formal, and you gotta, be careful how you tread. You can introduce conflict at a more linguistic level. And this is also related to how you tell a story. If you hear a kid telling a story, or somebody who doesn't know how to tell stories, it's all like, then we went to the beach, and then I went into the sea, then I was a bit cold, and then I was hungry, and all that, and then. Which is very boring, very flat. It's a wonderful word, simple, which is instead of using this, you use, but I was very cold, so I get out of the water. But I couldn't access the data, so I went looking for this tool, right? Just using those words, using this kind of contrast of say, like, look, this happened, but this got in the way. I think but is a word that is feared by some people, people who just want everything to be positive, but it's the most wonderful story word, because like, this happened and suddenly I didn't expect this, but this happened, right? And if you want to engage with the story, then so I did this, I went this way, okay? So this is the aspect of conflict. It has to be there, has to be in the background. And stories, especially when people talk about 3-act stories, 3-act stories, beginning, middle, and end, those are a bit of empty words. You need to set the conflict, escalate the conflict, and resolve the conflict. That's what people mean when they say 3 acts, beginning, middle, and end. So this is one of the most important ingredients for storytelling. And it might be a bit conceptual yet. So we're going to see how we do this with the data that we have. We're going to go into the most important part, which is the following. We're going to talk about the storyline. So what is the storyline? It can be, I'm going to start simple. It can be as simple as just outlining the different steps that you have done in your data project, right? From the cleaning of data, the extraction of data, then the model, and so on. And just so you see that I practice what I preach, this was my first novel, 180 sticky notes in my bedroom. So yeah, when any girl would walk in, I would look like a serial killer. That's the price I pay for good outlining. Outlining is key, and it sets you so ahead of what other people do in many data presentations. Let me give you an idea of an outline. So let's say that the first step is accessing the data, right? And we have trouble accessing the data, and then we solve it with another tool to put everything together, Snowflake, Hadoop, AWS, whatever you're using to collect the data. Okay. And the second part, right? You just remembering, what did I do in this project? Let's imagine, by the way, that we're using this Todoist application, right? This task management application, and first we access the data. So okay, then I did quite a lot of exploratory analysis. I was like, okay, so that was one thing. I was just looking around, and I figured out that I needed to combine data. So basically, I was looking at the data 3 months at a time, and to do a proper analysis, I didn't have enough. So I had to combine the data from October to December and January to March, right? So let's say that you didn't have enough data, but they are statistically similar, right? Even if they are from different samples, so you can combine. Okay. And then you were looking at the whole distribution of data. And as we were doing in the first part, we were trying different representations. We were trying to understand what was happening, right? This is the ugly one, the one that didn't work, but this is just to remember what you have done during the data project. Then we went into prediction, right? We wanted to generate an algorithm to predict the churn rate. For that, we need to establish a prediction period. So let's say that we have to predict 3 months in advance. So we want to predict who's going to leave in the next 3 months. How much data do you need for that? Do you need 3 months as well? Do you need 6 months? Do you need sometimes it's 2 weeks? Depends on the times and the gaps that the users have in the behavior. Let's say that you try different algorithms to establish this prediction. And let's say that the best one, the one you choose, is a random forest. Okay. And as you know, the random forest is really good to give you the variables importance. So what is connected to the churn rate, right? What features from the ones we have are collected to the churn rate. Let's imagine that, for example, we say that time spent on the app is 38% responsible, that the number of completed tasks is 29%, and the tenure is 22%. And then you say, oh yeah, but I remember, of course, that these percentages don't give us the direction of the influence. So in other words, I don't know if when people complete more tasks, they are more likely to leave or less. You can imagine the more tasks they complete, the less they leave, but you kind of put it together. So you say, okay, so let me plot it. And then you see this nice distribution, and we are full circle. So as you can see here, just put in the outline, because this is just me presenting you what I would have on sticky notes, right? And sticky notes, by the way, are a very kind of manual, physical element, and they are very healthy to work with when you do storytelling. So we have it all, and this already gives you the aspect of a presentation. I mean, I am presenting this, and so long as you have a good outline, again, you're really ahead of many people. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on those sticky notes that here we have seen as slides, and I'm going to put them all in a line, which is very appropriately called storyline. I did not invent this concept, but I did kind of introduce it into data storytelling realm, or at least I haven't seen other people doing it. So storyline in general, people in writing, right, especially in screenwriting, they use it as, okay, this is my storyline. I'm just going to put the events on it. Okay. This is what we're going to do at the very beginning, right? So what we're doing is like, we just have a normal life, right? Then the story goes in the middle. Then there's a climax to finish the story. And then there's a new normality, right? This is the global structure, right? Not as detailed as the outline I have shown you so far. And this is also to unify terminology, what I was talking about before when we talk about Act 1, beginning, Act 2, middle, Act 3, end, right? It's, again, use it as setting conflict, escalating conflict, and resolving the conflict. So my claim for this data storytelling, the most important part of this talk, is that the key to successful data storytelling is to find that storyline. So basically, every time I sit down with somebody and try to coach them in the way that they present the data, try to find, okay, we have this massive, horrific data set or these spreadsheets that are really big, I'm always looking for that line in my head, and I try to convey that. So this is the best advice I can give you when you have a data set, just try to have it in your head. Like, okay, how do I find that line? And it's literally a line. I'm going to show you many examples of this because it's in the examples that these concepts become clear and rich. So we're going to look for a line. Okay, that's going to be the goal. And the first example is just to have linear telling, right? So we just have the outline, right? Again, also is the word line there. We just have the outline of the different steps that we are covering. Let's say that, if we go even in more detail, we were just chilling, we had our normal life, right? We're all good. And then our boss tells us like, no, you have to do this project about churn. It's like, okay, well. And you are busy, you don't want to get involved, so you very politely decline and say, well, no, thank you very much. But then your boss says like, no, the company's going bankrupt, so we have to do this. Like, okay, well, then let me acquire the data, combine the data, and clean them, and so on. Okay? This is the linear telling, right? You can build an outline of everything that you have done. And if you are able to select the most important parts, play with the conflict, it's quite good, right? Even if you don't present all this, it is good to outline. But now, let's play a bit with this concept of finding the line of events in our data project. You might have heard very often something which is very trendy nowadays, which is starting with the why, or very often starting with the ending. I don't know if you know all those films or series as well that they want to show you something from the future, right? Because you're going to see how crazy this is going to get. I'm thinking of Breaking Bad, for example. And then you go back to the very beginning and then you tell the story slowly. So this is like starting with the why, let's say we save the company 100,000 euros. This is great. And then you go back to normal life, your boss, politely declining, and so on. Okay? There is nothing wrong with this. And sometimes the attention span of your audience is so little that you want to give them very quickly what's in it for them. You want to start with the why, because otherwise they're just going to go on their phones. Look, sometimes it's good. I do it very often. I'm not going to say no. But there are also other options. And so long as it's a good story, so long as it's clear what's at stake, you don't have to emphasize the why. It's not mandatory. When you say, look, I'm gonna see why 80% of the people are churning, right? That's gonna be my project. Or, well, in this case, 26%. I'm gonna study why 26% of the people are churning. The audience, hopefully, are not stupid, right? If you tell me in your company, look, I'm gonna see why 26% of our clients are leaving, it's like, I know why that's important. Yeah, it's clients, means money, all that. You don't need to explain to me why this is important. If you go straight to the conflict that you have, to what you want to solve, people care. If you see somebody in a film running with somebody behind with a sword, they don't need to explain you why, right? You get it, right? You know what the problem is, you know how it's going to solve it. So sometimes it's good to emphasize the why this is going to be so important, but there are other options. So just keep them in mind. Now, all we've done with the line so far is just find the sequence of events. And now for this, we just moved one. But this gets a bit more interesting when we looked at more complex settings. For example, the spreadsheet, right? Many people I coach, I ask them, look, do you do presentations with data? And they just like, no, I just, share my screen on Zoom and I show the spreadsheet. And I'm like, well, that's a presentation. It's a bad one, but it's still a presentation. And thinking of the formalism of the storyline, the problem becomes quite clear because the moment you have a spreadsheet, there's no way you can fit a line. This is a surface, right? And that means that when you present it to the audience, by the way, you shouldn't be looking around. You might be looking around. That's okay. I cannot stop you. These are like results from a survey that we run for different industries. But you see the problem. Some people are going to go one way. Some people are going to go to one column. Some people are going to go to one row. You don't control the audience's attention anymore. And that is fundamental. I think you can play around with as many resources as you have, but you need to know where your audience's attention is at every point. So you can direct them where you want. And there's nothing wrong with that, because this is not to manipulate in any way. It's to make things clear, to guide them through a journey, the journey that you have built. So we are with the spreadsheet. And if you have it in mind, if you're thinking, okay, I'm telling you, it's all about finding the storyline, okay? And it's very literally a line. So some of you might already be thinking about it. Okay, let me just take one row, for example. This is something that can work very well. It's one row to illustrate the process. What are we doing here? I'm going to take the industry of AI, and I'm going to guide you through the results, through its results, along the different questions of the survey, so you can understand what's going on in the survey. Do I need to do that for every row? No, you get it. If you understand how one industry performs in the different questions, you understand what's at stake with the different questions, and then you can generalize, right? Audiences are much better at generalizing than at coming up with examples. So I still remember this client that I was coaching, and it was a massive spreadsheet. And I was trying to understand it. I'm human as well. I see the spreadsheet with 200 columns, I kid you not. And I'm like, please, I don't get it. Please explain it to me. It's like, yeah, it's about the regulations for the general handling of complaints of users in the American market. I'm like, okay, this is complaints like that. And then somebody else who was in the session as well, he says like, Juan, this is about a guy in Chicago that has a problem with his shaving machine. And I like, okay, I get it, right? It's very specific, but that is good for story, right? You're not disguising, you're not hiding behind abstract words that some people might understand, some people might not. It's like, you give me a concept of this, like, I get it, because this is one of the rows, right? There is a guy in Chicago having a problem with a shaving machine. I can understand that there's a lady in Washington having a problem with an electrical toothbrush, right? I can generalize, right? So could you, so can the audience in general. So just try to be specific. And when you have to try to save spreadsheets, you can say, okay, let me just look for one line, right? If I can create one certain character and I can make it as specific as possible, you are in a good way. And then the people will be able to fill in the gaps. Now, some of you might have thought, well, we've used a horizontal line. Could we use a vertical line, right? So could we focus on one of the features across the industries? You could. In that case, you're using one column to illustrate the differences in a feature. You can do this with a bar graph, for example. You just want to plot the different bars, the different results for one industry. That's what you do when you plot a bar graph. Just focusing, just following one line. If you do that bar graph after bar graph after bar graph, you're going to bore the audience. So this has its limitations. You want to do this if it's a very important feature that you want to see the differences in, okay, you can do it. Very often, what I tell my clients is that, look, storytelling is complicated. It's going to take time. So, sometimes you cannot do everything at once. And if you have bi-weekly meetings, monthly meetings, or something like that, it's sometimes good to say, look, I cannot explain everything, right? People should know these things, but they don't. And I cannot explain everything at once. I'm just going to focus on one little aspect. So if you want to focus on that column or two columns and you want to have those graphs very clearly, that's okay. Sometimes we got to cut our losses and say, look, I'm just going to focus on a little concept. And then slowly with time, I'll build up their knowledge. Let's look at more example of the storyline. And again, what I would like you to take away is just you think about that line. When you have crazy data, just trying to find, that's like the water trying to find the path, right? It can bend a bit, the storyline. Just try to find a way, because you are bound by time. When you tell it, you have to go with time. I cannot travel back in time. I cannot do crazy things. But some people try. And I'm going to show you when this logic goes wrong. Bullet points. Not cool. We know that. We know there's something wrong with bullet points. What is it? I'm going to show you. You have 3 bullet points, I've had some bullet points here in this talk. That's completely fine. When the order is clear, when there's a clear line going down, for example, for an agenda or in the subchapters, that's not a problem because people understand the logic behind it. It's okay, you're going to go one after the other, right? And they are separate or they might build upon previous knowledge, but the order is very clear. Good, nothing wrong with that. Problem comes when you have 3 bullet points in one slide, 3 in the next one, and 3 in the next one. Because that's when, if people are not paying a lot of attention, and some people, we all get distracted somehow, sometimes we have after lunch talks and it's tricky. People are like, where's my line? Where's my line? Where's my line? Thank you. No, not that line. Where's my storyline? Okay. Because there are many, many possibilities here, right? Is it that this is one of the subcategory of this one, or this is the only one important and this is the only one important, right? It's a hierarchy of them and I'm just focusing on the first one. Or is it that, then I go here and here? Or is it maybe that the first category divides in 3 and then the first subcategory divides in another 3? There are many, many possibilities, right? And if we abuse them, what's going to happen in the audience's mind is that they're going to go all sort of crazy ways. Just to give you an example that, this might look an exaggeration and you may say like, oh, but what bullet points are there? Maybe it's clear. Something that data scientists can do very easily. And I'm going to take the super simplified version. Actually, it's not realistic in any way. Features of the data. I presented you some, actually. We're talking about the number of tasks, calendar integration, number of sessions. I take a moment. This goes against the story. What are you going to do? You need to set it up. You need to say, okay, these are the features that we collected. They are independent, hopefully, for the analysis, and you just have to catch up with that information. So very slowly, you rebuild it. Okay, you have to do that. But then you go and say, okay, and the algorithms we're going to use are random forest, logistic regression, and neural network. And then in the next slide, you say the metrics that we're going to use are ROC, precision, and recall. It might make sense to you. It probably does if you work in data science. But what people are hearing is blah, blah. And I lock the front door. I don't know. Did you lock the front door? I don't know. You need a direction. You need to let them know, like, look, this is the list of features. The 3 algorithms are also going to be independent and are going to run on all, are going to build upon all the algorithms. And then we're going to use the metrics. If you present it like this, you're killing the story, right? It's difficult. It is difficult to get that flow of a line because the algorithms go on different lines and they all apply to the data. So you have to space this information. Okay, we go with the data and then I give you a bit of story, a bit that something that I can follow with a line. Then I tell you about the algorithms one by one. Okay, then it's like a chronology, like a agenda, like cover 1, cover 2, cover 3. And slowly you get the audience in. And maybe the metrics, you go ROC as the first one, but that wasn't enough. So I look at the precision and so on, right? So data storytelling is not easy. And you're aiming at that line because you're going to be bound by time eventually. But some concepts are very separated, very kind of like compartmentalized, and you have to try to break it. One final example that I'm going to give you about the storyline, just to send you away with something that it can be very satisfying. This is something that I got a lot of students doing. Actually, this is not an idea I got by myself. I just saw many students doing it, and it just works every time, which is the following. There's a 60% probability to churn in general, right? Let's stick with this case, right? And then they say, but within the paid customers is higher. Even more so, you could put another but there, for 65 or older, and higher for women. That progression of starting with the data in general and say, okay, this is the general distribution, but let me show you this country in particular, or let me show you this gender, and then let me show you this sector. That is a wonderful way to go deeper into the data. That is the way you build a nice storyline, right? So when you can do that, and when you can use this kind of but, so it's like, but don't think this was even for every quantity. So we looked at France, we looked at Germany, all those things. This is a very healthy way to get the flow of the story. So what I would like you to take away from this is that a story has always a direction, right? Opposite to spreadsheets or bullet points. So when you're trying to get a story, and a story in the proper way, a story in the way that is entertaining and it generates cortisol, oxytocin, and whatnot, it involves this kind of sequence of events. So find your storyline and your investors. Okay? So let me cover again the things that we have talked about. We talked a bit about visualization, and within there, we talk about the principle of separation. Remember, try not to do everything at once. Try not to make it pretty straight away. You build slowly, you generate a lot of ideas, and then you select. When you're good, when you know what you want from a data point of view, then you clean and you highlight. And that's completely fine if you want to stop there, right? If you want to just have clear visualization explaining what you have, that's great. But if you want a real story, and if you want to get the benefits of it, just remember, you're going to need conflict. It doesn't have to be crazy. It can be just in the language, in the way you contrast ideas, but it has to be there. And then if you want to generate something that has more body and has more substance, remember the concept of the storyline. Try, picture that line in your head, and it's that line that you're trying to find somewhere. It's like you see a table, can I go here, diagonally, upwards, downwards, any way I can find it to get that dynamic. So there's a lot to talk about visualization, storytelling. I come from Growth Tribe. We normally teach courses. We have courses in growth strategies now, and also on growth hacking, right? If you're interested in the more marketing side. We also have a lot of data courses and UX. We have the UX course, which is doing really well lately. And then data analytics in massive and business analytics course. When we cover these kind of models, of course, we talk a lot about analytics, but also about these things of storytelling and visualization and communication in general. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. If you could spare just a couple of minutes to give us feedback on the event, it'd be great. All you have to do is go to grow.ac/story. It will take you a couple of minutes. And while you do that, I'll be very happy to take questions and discuss any ideas that you have about data storytelling or any curiosities that you have. So go ahead.
Wow, Juan, amazing talk, amazing to listen to, great story from A to B. Yeah, we have not really a question from my Irish, but again, another compliment, great way to explain things. And from Anders, thanks for the great presentation. Many things to take with me. Is it possible to get your presentation? I will need to try to test it. Any advice? I actually have a lot of amazing content, a lot of knowledge. Is there more where we can learn more about your style, something to publish, YouTube channel?
Yes. Okay. So I'm not sure about the presentation file itself, how these things work. I will have to check with direction. I mean, I have no problem, but we gotta keep our content. For the visualization part, like the book I recommended, I think it covers quite a lot. For the storytelling part, this concept of the storyline with even more examples and another one, articles on using analogies, you can find on our blog. So it's the Growth Tribe blog, and just search for my name and they should be there. So yeah.
All right.
I'm also on Medium, if you want to find me, Juan Venegas. I do have fiction stories because I'm also a writer, so you will find fiction stories and also some concepts of data storytelling. I talk a lot about this definition of data storytelling and these little things. So yeah, those are the channels, the Growth Tribe blog, and you can find me on Medium.
All right, perfect. We have another compliment coming in. Many thanks. It was really great, very inspiring. I can just agree from minute one on, amazing. And more compliments coming in. So yeah, take it. Amazing talk. Thank you for closing this session for today. So these were the talks of the second conference today. I hope you all had an amazing day full of inspiration and meaningful lessons. Once again, I want to say a special thank you to our sponsors, Accenture. Huge thank you for our organizers, to track moderators who worked hard to make this conference happen. Finally, thank you so much for your conference speakers. Again, Juan, amazing talk. I wish everyone a nice day. Happy to see you next year. If you need to connect on Pine or follow social media, do so. Thank you for the event and for everything else. See you another.
Thank you all. Bye.